Hi, this is Bernard.
Hi, Bernard.
Hi.
Am I audible properly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Your voice little faint.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll try to reconnect. Give me a moment, yeah?
Okay. Yeah, hi, Tom. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Bim. Yeah, just waiting for Bernard to join. And let's wait for another 1 more minute, and then we'll start.
Sure.
Hi, this is Bernard.
Yeah, hi, Bernard. Okay. So let's proceed with our today's agenda. Let me share my screen. Okay. I hope my screen is visible.
Yeah, looks good.
So for today's agenda, I have kept these three topics: discussion on user story, and some discussion on our scope, means what exactly the work group 5 would scope for its work, and the last one is the topology controller, means how we could derive some ideas from there and try to use in our service assurance use case. So just before going there, Miss, I'll just give a quick recap that we did during the last meeting. So we discussed about our summit inputs and around some idea exchange, like how the where the closed loop involves, and what should be the time constant related, time sensitivity related closed loop is that. And also we had some action item to discuss on topology controller and RFC that suggested by PM. Actually, that contains a lot of good inputs actually about the service assurance. Is how we could realize the assurance graph, and using that graph, how the any system who will sit on the top of assurance could take a benefit. So those things actually we can derive those ideas. And also we had some conclusions also, this group will pay attention on the real-time use cases, and also we look around some time sensitivity constraints and things. And we also talked about the sorry, actually the team talked about some scenarios that I did not capture it correctly. I need to fix it. And also we discussed about how service assurance loop could be decomposed into the three part. One is observability, analysis, and policy for the action. So these three, when we combine these three, we could visualize our service assurance loop. Okay, and yeah, we were also discussing on the redefining our scope, and and one important thing that Bernard added, like observability should also able to capture the data or read the KPI parameters from the external system. So that capability should observability should have it. So that those things we were discussing. So yeah, any question around this? Otherwise, I'll go to the edge of our first topic.
personally, I would want to start with the scope discussion, but maybe I'm also wrong here. But I would want to make sure that when we're looking at our working group, that we have a common understanding of what is in the scope of the working group, and then we can sort of go into the details of user stories and certain technologies which we would look at. But currently, my understanding is a bit fuzzy here, and it would help me to sort of agree in this team on the scope which we would want to address here.
Sure, Bernard.
Please sort of, Tal, Wim, Bala, please help me here if I'm mistaken here and you believe that is already very clear.
Oh, that sounds right to me as well.
Yeah, Bernard. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with this. The first point. Last time when I discussed with our SIG one, so Sana C has added some description for the work group 5. So I think that could we could take as our starting point for defining our scope. So I'll just read it out. So it depended on the SIG automation observability work that we agree, and working on the policy and the closed loop across different layer of stack. And another important point, cross-pollination with the ORAN. So yeah, this point came after when I giving some inputs to Sana. We were also trying to compare ORAN architecture with our assurance stack. So actually. One opinion also could come like.
Yeah, Subhash. So sorry if I just sort of jump in, but I just would want to sort of make clear that sort of what is written down there is more related to what's happening elsewhere. Yeah, that means sort of outside of this working group. And I would like to come up with sort of a scoping of if we're looking at service assurance in the context of Nephew, what would we want to discuss here? And of course, those aspects which you're writing down here are of relevance. Yeah, we should not neglect them, but they are not defining the scope. Yeah, they are sort of boundary conditions which we should try to keep in mind. But what I would like to propose is sort of, I've started scribbling down quickly something just as a foundation of that we understand sort of what are basically the things which we will be generating in the course of this working group. And if you have the possibility to go into this design considerations document, I started scribbling down one page with the scope definition. And again, it's only a draft for proposal, not something which is final, but which is possibly giving us a chance of aligning on what we would want to achieve here. And if it's okay, I would quickly go to that slide. So sort of the observation was from the discussions which we had last time, that sort of Nephew is positioning itself as a domain controller for the cloud infrastructures, the CNFs, and their basic configuration. And it therefore should also describe how it would support the requirements which are related to service assurance. And for the working group, I then derived out of this the objective to describe a set of reference use cases related to service assurance, the basic concepts of how Nephew will support these use cases, the functional elements which Nephew will make use of for these use cases, and interface specifications between these elements and possibly external components. That was sort of a very quick draft of what I believe we might want to address here. And I would really want to open up the discussion and see if there's things wrong, missing, or if we need to go into the other direction. But I'd like to have this as a sound foundation for our further activities. Any comments from your side?
This seems quite good to me. I think that an important word here is use cases related to service assurance. This is to diffuse maybe some concerns that we are from other people that we are taking up something too big, that it shouldn't be related. But I think the point is that we really are not trying to cover the entire topic of service assurance, but rather to do what we can to participate in the story of service assurance. So I think that's important. I think the second point might be a little vague, basic concepts. Maybe that we can drill in a bit more, but the other ones are the third and fourth point seem correct to me as well, right? It's the functional elements But we identify them and then identify, well, it's identifying those functional elements, but I think also how they string together to create a narrative, right, for service assurance. I think I would want to add maybe the word narrative somewhere here, because that's important. It's the flow, right, from one functional element to the other that creates the control loop.
I agree, but I wanted to put that into this context of the use cases. So the basic idea was to say, if we've got these use cases, these functional elements will support that, and based on that, we would also have some kind of, let's say, framework into which these elements would contribute with their capabilities. And so
that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not objecting to this, just offering maybe drilling down some more.
Yeah. So again, please.
Sorry, I'll raise my hand. Yeah, so I think for me, what we should do is probably two things, right? One is the focus is indeed on the domain side, right? So where we focus on the scope that Nefio set out, right? Which is what you, I think, highlighted in the beginning. But in my view, I would summarize it in two things that we have to do, right? One is use case, and the second is I would phrase it as a framework that Nefio, a framework or architecture that Nefio would, let's say, use with respect to service assurance.
I think that's a good idea. Maybe we could then sort of say, in the context of this framework, we would then also describe the functional elements and the interfaces. But I would agree, it's basically, for me, sort of makes sense. My question is, Wim, would you just be so kind to sort of just adapt that? And from my perspective, I would be then fine with as a foundation for our further discussion, because it will then guide us a little bit to say, okay, we need to be very clear about the use cases which we want to support, and then sort of talk about the framework, which would sort of be consisting of the elements and the interface specifications.
Do you share this? Did you share this document, Bernard?
I think if you look into the Slack,
okay.
At the top of the group, there's this documents folder, and there in this folder there's this design considerations document.
I'll share it once again.
I got it. It's fine. Yeah.
But I think it's always easy just if you have this possibility. If in Slack you see directly at the top, you can share links, and there I've shared this documents folder so that we can capture all the service assurance related documents in one area.
Yeah, I think these are very well written. I think 4 cases. Thanks, Bernard. Yeah, I think your 4th point captures, like interplaying with other components, such as, for example, Nefio is not going to operate in vacuum. There'll be somebody else on the top, maybe SMO, maybe OSS layer, maybe some other orchestrator. So I think there are 2 levels of service assurance I can think of. One is autonomous, where probably the workload clusters where they have to take some of their own decisions themselves. And then there is overarching end-to-end systems. So whereas the system sitting above us will take certain decisions for us. And then in these both cases, we need to support, so we can figure it out based on these 4 principles, like what for example, it kind of drives us to think about what kind of metrics, telemetry that we need to define, what kind of data we need and other systems need in order to make the decisions, what kind of alarms that we need to be defined. That is a fundamental level. Then we can think about, obviously, Prometheus and other actual implementation things. Thank you.
Agree. But Bala, if I get you correctly, this concepts part is also essential from your point of view, because you were just making the distinction between different types of service assurance modes. And I was just wondering if we should try to highlight that as well, because all those differentiations which we are now introducing here and trying to classify certain aspects would require that we write that down. That is not only implicitly in the framework somehow implemented, but that we clearly sort of have also a description of why we followed that type of functional approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Subhash, sorry.
Yeah. So actually, I have a question. Like in work group 5, would we talk about the framework details, or we are going to define architecture here, or a very sorry, I mean to say we define the spec there, and in the SIG 3 we are going to create some sub projects which will work towards its implementation. So what exactly you think?
So to be honest, I believe we've got quite an overlap of sort of activities where we will see that we need to align between the different working groups and streams, etc. So it's not like sort of we define something and the other team is doing something totally different, and then when we try to bring it together, it doesn't fit. We need, when we're discussing those frameworks and functional elements, we need to work together, so that not only from a conceptual point of view, sort of top down, but also from a, let's say, implementation perspective, these elements are sort of structured in such a way that we do not come up with a clash of concepts here. And so therefore, sort of the points which you are listing in the Word document, in the Google document, were exactly related to that aspect, yeah, in the sense of what's happening with the observability sort of concept here in the automation workstream. Can we use that? What about ORAN and those aspects, etc.? So definitely we cannot do that as an island here and simply say this is how we see the world. We need to talk to the other teams as well.
Okay, so definitely we need a cross-pollination actually about these ideas. And yeah, and one more question. Currently, we do. I think still there are a lot of debate, like whether Nefio, in current form, it's delivering all the features required for the domain controller. Currently, I think we are only dealing with the configuration. We still lack some features where we can call it as a domain controller, right? So, are we agree that we should develop it like a domain controller? Is it right understanding?
Yeah, I would say, I would ask what the domain is exactly. I think that statement is a little bit broad. Especially, Bernard, you didn't put an article there. Nefio positions itself as the domain controller or a domain controller, right? I would say it's a domain controller because we don't own the cloud infrastructure necessarily. We interact maybe with systems that do manage it. And that's probably important to remember too, that there might be other controllers working in the domain that do other things. So
I fully agree. And I was actually very vague when I described that. You're right. If we can have that in a more specific statement, I would love to take that statement, because basically this statement would be something which I would normally take from the whole Nefio program and say, this is what Nefio does.
Right.
But to be honest, I still have this a little bit of fuzzy feeling about sort of the scoping and alignment with sort of all the different surrounding concepts. That's why I put it in.
You're in good company. Yeah. I do too. I think different people in the project have a different idea about the scope and who controls what. And maybe on that point, I'll add one more point. You know, regarding what you said of, yeah, we have to take into account other projects and other systems. I would maybe caution us not to go too far with that. I think a lot of our discussions in SIG 1 about the north, south, east, west integrations have kind of gotten out of hand. We created really far-reaching diagrams, really covering the industry as a whole, right? And I think if we go too far, we'll never be able to do something for ourselves. I think it's fine if we have our own maybe quirky Nefio narrative on this, and we can talk about how it relates to other projects, but let's not try, I think, from the very start to create something that connects to ORAN and ETSI and 3GPP and absolutely everything else, because we will never be able to proceed. Yeah. So from the very start, I said, let's start with a POC. something small that conceptually we can understand within the Nefio group. Obviously, many of us think about the other projects working and the other standards, and we can relate to that. But that can come later, I think, as we evolve more.
So to be honest,
by the way, on the chat, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one small remark to that. I really want to go to the bare necessities. That means sort of what is the real core sort of functional aspect. And I'm not talking about packaging and how I structure the data, etc. But I'm talking about the functional aspect of, yes, we need to understand where to monitor, what to monitor, how to correlate, etc. So that we have these functional blocks and say, in the Nefio context, we can support those functional blocks in a certain manner. And then that's it. Yeah, and I don't want to say it has to be in Tosca format or it has to then sort of comply with TMF or whatever.
Right.
This is coming on top of that.
No, you emphasize this quite well here in the second point, right? Because our starting point is how Nefio will support these use cases. We're not really talking about how ORAN IMS necessarily participates in this, but that could come later. And we have other working groups, of course, working on those integrations. So I think we're all on the same page, just maybe reiterating the same thing. I did want to point out that Varada put a question on the chat. So I don't know if Varada, you want to make it open and contribute to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Tal. So so you want to make domain controller, as fuzzy as like this?
As a starting point, I believe that currently, if we are looking at the release 1, it was very much focusing on configuration management provisioning procedures, not so much on service assurance part, the other part of the closed loop from my perspective. And that's why I sort of just picked up this discussion which we had last time. We're saying, yes, it's sort of to a certain degree acting as a domain controller. And if it does so, then we need to be consistent in also trying to understand how would it also support the service assurance part, making sure that the conversion to the target state and the required qualities is given.
Yeah, it looks good to go, Bernard. Like, at least we could understand, and also the use case part, as well as the functional elements part, interface specifications part. At least we are very clear. We are in SIG 1, right? And and the objective also looks very precise to me. Yeah.
Okay, so if it's good enough, then I wouldn't want to have long discussions about it. Yeah, but because anyhow, sort of there will be sort of iterations of optimization to be considered. But if it's good enough for us to start, then I think I wouldn't sort of want to waste too much time on refining it to the max.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, I agree.
So Bernard, when I made a point, you said we should capture that. Do you think did you want me to capture in this slide or maybe some other backup deck? Backup slide in this deck.
So please feel free to enhance it. Yeah, I just wanted to have in this team a common understanding. Yes, that we need to talk about the use cases. We need to talk about sort of the basic concepts. We need to talk about the framework with the functional elements and interfaces, and then that would be the deliverables which we would be working on. I wanted to make sure that we are on the same page of what we will be trying to address in this time. That was my main concern here.
Cool, thanks.
So that we're not meandering around. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, cool.
Bernard, I have a suggestion. If we could directly point clearly that what will be the deliverable from workgroup 5. So I think we should write it somewhere. Since we are going to deliver framework.
Yeah, but it's written
cases.
there. Actually, it's written. Yeah. It's written there.
Yeah.
We've got a set of reference use cases. We've got a list of basic concepts which Nefio will support for supporting these.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah, we've got this framework, etc. So basically, it is a certain list of deliverables which we would have. Here.
Okay. So our objective is our deliverables. Okay, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bernard, for bringing us in a common page, actually. Yeah. Okay. So
I was gonna add one point, especially I think Varda asked the domain controller part. The thing is, obviously, with the end-to-end service perspective, right? There are a lot of components involved. There could be other VNFs involved or PNFs involved, some other routers, gateways, whatnot. Obviously, NFV is not gonna do anything to them. I mean, it doesn't have purview of them. It does not control them. So that's why it's at this point of time, it's only its contribution, its world is only Kubernetes. Beyond that, it doesn't do anything else. So that's the reason.
I fully agree, but that's why I explicitly said for the cloud infrastructure CNFs in their basic configuration, that was the 3 Nephew pillars, which we have in the overview picture. And I was saying it was only acting in this domain.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not like a RAN domain or access domain. It's even a subset of that. So that's why I want.
Absolutely, yes, I agree. I was just trying to add that point to Vardha's question.
Excellent. Yes, got it. Yeah.
So Vardha, just to make sure, is Vardha first name or?
Yeah. This is my first name. My full name is Vardarajan, but
your last name is Srinivas, is that right?
Yeah. My last name is Srinivas. Yeah.
Okay.
I know your last name is Varadaraju, right?
Yeah. For the rest of the crew, I'll tell you just a fun fact before we proceed. Vardha's first name, my last name, semantically.
Okay.
And his first name is something. My first name is his last name is his last name is my first name, semantic, something like that.
Okay.
Fun fact for the rest of the crew.
Right. And it's better to shorten our names for the Bala and Varda.
Yeah.
Or we could say Bala inverse, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'll just jump to our second point. So the same so the second item, second agenda, second item for today's agenda is user story and the design details. So the same document contains the same document also contains one user story that we try to formulate. I'll just put in slideshow. So this user story is impact analysis. So I'll just read out the problem statement. So how can a service assurance solution determine if issue related to a managed resource affected the desired state and the qualities expressed in high-level intent? And in order to do this impact analysis, we need to collect the KPI parameters using the observability, and then we need to formulate some kind of of impact graph or correlation graph. And from there, we need to correlate the resource with the intent. And with that idea, actually, that there is one topology controller. So that also are doing some certain similar things. So that's why we wanted to put to get some idea from the topology controller. So that was our initial thought, this user story, if we could take it. So any thoughts or any questions? Ms., what do you think? Okay.
I'm reading it actually.
Yes. Okay.
I'm also reading. I'm having some trouble following it.
Okay.
I guess impact on the rest of the Nephew project. Is that what you're thinking, or impact on?
Yeah. So sorry. If I jump one slide before, I think that will give us some better idea what exactly we are thinking. So generally, what happens? We have the high-level intent, and that is broken down into another intent or the resources, right? And the respective operator, they realize those resources, right? And finally, we deploy in our workload cluster. And thing is that we need to correlate those resources with the our high-level intent. So also, note that intent could be related. Intent could be related to another intent by means of some resource, right? Just to give an example, UPF is dependent on the AMF, right? In order to do some kind of authentication, right, with some interface. So just assume that UPF is related to AMF, and assume that some resource related to UPF or AMF is down. It is impacting one of the high level intent. So also it will be impacting the another intent, right? So those entire correlation we need to do it, right? So we need to do impact analysis to understand if a resource get impacted, how the intents is getting deteriorated. So that root cause, that root cause analysis we need to do it. Yeah.
So maybe I'll add, if you can go back to the impact slide.
Yeah.
I would understand this as what is our unit, right? What is our low level unit? And I think we're making it clear that the unit is actually a topology rather than just a single network function, right? We're taking into account that the service, right? This might sound very obvious, right? We're talking about a service rather than a function, right? So it's probably important for us to define what the service is from Nefio's perspective. Obviously, we're not a service orchestrator, right? There are many definitions at the service is, and we don't want to go into those levels, right? That's out of scope for Nefio. But what is in scope for Nefio is connections between network functions, right? Including actual network connections, but there could be other configuration relationships as well, right? So that's, I guess, why we're focusing also on the topology controller as an important component for us. But I think that's what you're trying to say here. Am I correct?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Right. So if you check the documentation from the current topology controller, I guess they have some edge watcher, so that collects all the events from the resource, and again there is some gRPC server and the client, and using that they pass those events, and finally the topology controller correlated and call it certain that service is got deployed. It's like that intent got deployed, I would say. So similar idea we also have it. We should have one generic framework where we could say that for this resource you observe something and try to collect those events and try to do some kind of correlation and try to understand how it is getting how the intent is getting impacted. So that impact analysis actually we would like to do it. So that was the idea actually. There should be a relationship between your resource and higher level construct. And
yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
If I would like to point out that sort of in the acceptance criteria, sort of there's a certain understanding also described of what would happen. That means that if we're looking at sort of this process of making use of Nefio for the configuration process, that as a byproduct of this process, we not only generate the Kubernetes resources, which are then rolled out to the clusters, but potentially also this correlation information in a machine readable format. And I would just want to sort of see if that makes sense or not. Yeah.
If you look to the document that I shared from IETF, right, which is basically they actually define the framework, which is very generic. What they do is basically, so rather than in your intent, you're not only defining the configuration, but also the related objects that are related to the assurance. And they get information about that. And then within the controller, you basically, we do the correlation and stuff like that. So in my view, that whole document describes, in my view, very well on how we can adopt this easily. And they have the graph and they have the dependencies and all of that stuff laid out. So, but from my perspective, if you look to
the
how,
only thing which,
so let me finish maybe.
The only thing
if you look on how this whole,
sorry,
I'll stop there. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was interrupting you. Sorry.
So what I'm trying to say is that today what we do is we define the intent, right? So basically we say, okay, for configuration, okay, we want this. We started now to discuss the highest level, right? But you have this concept at every level, in my view, where you describe, okay, this is what I want my desired state with respect to configuration, right? But you also basically say, okay, these are the information that I need to determine the health or the assurance of that thing or that intent. And that is the information you use, and you use it for correlation. And you can then, on one hand, just report to say, okay, this is the health that I calculated based on that, or you can take action.
Okay, if I may, so first of all, I think that's a good approach. I just wanted to mention that there is one slight tweak which I have in mind in this context. So what I've understood is that in the configuration process of Nephew, we would have the chance to, for instance, do fan out or sort of create sub-resources which were not defined in the high-level intent, etc. And these rules for doing that are then sort of making use of these KPT functions to achieve this type of sort of result. And therefore, if you're having a high-level intent, you would have to understand sort of how would I bring these different elements together into a consistent overview and a consistent picture. And it's not only about saying sort of that there are certain metrics to be considered here, but also about how do these metrics potentially sort of, if I'm measuring them in different areas, how would they potentially have to be correlated? And I was only wanting to start first with the correlation backbone, in the sense of there might be an effect of certain resources amongst one another, not really going into the details of how I do the calculations for specific metrics and situations, but rather just saying there is a sort of a dependency or a relationship between those entities, and we should try to evaluate those if we're doing any kind of root cause analysis or impact analysis in our operational procedures.
Yeah, but if you look to how the dependency controller work, right, it builds a graph at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically the basis for all of this. And the graph is just, at that level, it's very simple, right? It's basically builds the relationship between the different network functions.
That's right. Great. And I just wanted to expose that as a machine readable format, which can then be used by other tools if needed. Yeah. So it shouldn't be hidden and implicitly used, but it should be made explicit, so that based on that we can say we've got a foundation for the further activities.
Yeah, so even in that CRD, right, it's actually exposed in the status of the CR. You will see it.
So yeah, let's go. We're already talking about the details of how to implement that, and that's great. Yeah, but I think sort of the basic understanding is, yes, we need this topology information. We need it in a machine readable format, and we need to talk about how do we generate that and sort of retrieve it for further processing.
Mm-hmm. Bernard, so if I understand it correctly, so you also talk about some I would call it model-driven observability, because we are going to derive what parameters would be needed to understand those NF, right, directly from the configuration, if I understand correctly. Based on that, we will going to configure on the observability what we would like to get those parameters. Either it could be a sidecar or anything, right? Just I'm keeping it black box there. And once we are able to collect those parameters, we will create some impact graph, and then we would like to also introduce that graph externally, or even open to the other component, so that they can perform certain they can use actually that impact graph for further activities, right? And yeah, till this right, I'm correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm fine there. And do you think from the package configuration, are we able to derive those kind of parameters on which assurance is going to depend on? So that should be derived at the time of as part of the KPT pipeline. Do you think that
again, there's two types of information which we're currently referring to. The first one is related to the topology, the relationships. It's not about parameters. It's just about sort of resource A has some kind of relationship to resource B, yeah, and up to the high level intent which has been issued. That's number one. So, and basically, this is a graph. Wim was talking about the dependency graph which was being generated here. So, and the other aspect is that in the course of the rollout of a network solution, we could also think of how would this sort of, let's say, parameterization or configuration of the service assurance procedures have to take place. What kind of metrics should we collect? Sort of possibly also talk about sort of rules to be considered here. But I wanted to really start with the basics and say, let's make sure that the topology is sort of clear. And I would really want to make sure that if we're talking about the user story one, we are not mixing up too many different things, because then we would be blurring the picture of what we would want to achieve. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But if I may, Talris, I'm so sorry to jump the line, but for me, it's very, the way I see it is very simple, right? Take the topology controller, right? It's going to, the topology controller is going to determine a set of dependencies, and he needs a certain network functions and where they need to deploy, right? Okay, so he makes a decision on that, and he asks the relevant information with respect to these network functions, right? Now, the specifics of the network function will be the next hierarchy, right? So the same happens to the next level, right? So because the network, so the topology controller will ask the network function, okay, I need this, right? Or maybe other pieces. And so you see, if you build this system in a hierarchical way, you don't need to understand all the nitty-gritty. The topology controller doesn't need to understand the nitty-gritty details of the network function. He will basically get that in a hierarchical fashion. And by doing so, we keep the concept of that hierarchy that you have. Topology controller builds a service with network functions. Network functions collect information related to the network function. And if you roll that up in a hierarchical way and just ask so each layer should interact with its own entities. And by doing that, I think you can build a very nice service assurance framework.
Excellent.
Okay.
Tal.
Yeah, Tal. It's good.
Yeah, we moved ahead a little bit, but it is still related, my comment. Just pointing out that if we are jumping ahead already and getting into the details, Stephen is mostly working on the topology controller, but I've talked to him a lot about this in the past week, and it's very, very open. Right, the point of the topology controller is really to service the rest of Nefio, right? So I think, going back to Bernard's original slide of identifying the components in Nefio that we would work with, well, we have a lot of influence over those components. So, Stephen would very much welcome input from us over how to make the topology controller drive use cases, right? That's the preference, actually. We don't want to just create a topology controller that does topologies. Right, we wanted to actually be part of useful use cases for Nefio. So I'm just pointing out that we actually have a lot of influence from this work group on the evolution there. We don't have to take what's there as just the finished reality. Yeah, so that's it.
Yep. Okay. I'll go ahead. So would it be a good idea next week? Let's call Stephen here and let's try to understand his progress on topology controller and try to bring try to do a brainstorming, like how we could share the input and how we could understand it. Let's try to invite him next week.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, although maybe we can wait and get a little bit more meat for our use case. I don't know if we can give him too much input yet, but he can at least tell us where he is right now.
Okay.
Sure, we can invite him.
Right. And I also believe, the use case, this objective should influence topology controller, not the reverse way.
Yeah. Yes, sure. Okay. Okay,
So just a quick question to the round here. So we've now started with this sort of a first user story, yeah? And from this user story, we already identified that there are potential implementation options, and we need to do the further alignment. I just wanted to understand our working mode a little bit, so that based on this working mode, we can repeat this mechanism over and over again if needed. So now sort of the question could be, is the user story good enough? Or for instance, for the automation work group, would we want to be a little bit more specific to make it more tangible for, let's say, a release 3 implementation? So I just wanted to sort of make sure that when we're saying we've got this user story or this use case, check mark, yes, it's good enough, or it's not good enough, and then we still need to work on it and sort of make sure that it's then sort of has the quality which can be used for the next team. What is your impression here?
Now,
Bala, please
so sorry, Bala. Yeah, go ahead, Bala.
Yeah, so thanks, Wim. So this one, on the first user story, right? So I'm slightly, let me ask a very silly question, please pardon my ignorance. So we are also defining the fundamental aspects of the health of the systems in this group, right?
I would imagine, yes. Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So I think, to me, this is a great story, Subhash, that you come up with. But maybe this is a little bit advanced story from a overall service assurance perspective. The most fundamental story is, from service assurance perspective, as a first story, in my view, is what is the health of my system? What is, for example, we have several functions, several controllers running on both workload, mainly on the management systems, and also the workload clusters as well. So at the very fundamental level, what is the health of those systems? Like, are they doing good? Are they receiving requests? Are they, for example, I mean, I don't know how far Porch itself is instrumented. Tal, you may know, Wim or Tal, you may know this better. I'm pretty sure it has some instrumentation in terms of exposing their metrics as well. So from our perspective, the very, very fundamental health of the system may be a very, in my view, is a candidate for the first user story. Let's determine the metrics and expose them as to just to know how the very basic health of the your system. That's what.
Yeah, I would say, you know, we don't have to go too deep into this, because I think we're working on the higher level mechanism, right? Whatever telemetry is available. I don't want to push our initial use case into starting to develop telemetry that we don't have yet, right? Because that would imply, you know, creating more workload cluster systems to get that telemetry. I don't think it's critical, right? It's just a data point for us, right? So we can work with what we have at first. And obviously, the more telemetry is there, the more, the richer our use case can be, right? But I think we can start with the basics of what we have. And, you know, there's different work being done on observability. So whatever they provide, right, we can use. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, so observability is a separate thing than service assurance?
Yes, the way things involved in our community right now is that we have a different group of people who are passionate about observability and are working to create a framework, I would guess, for Nefio, right? So, yeah, obviously, you know, there's a lot of overlap between the work groups, as we know. But there's just so much work to be done, so we're dividing and conquering, right, the best we can. But yeah, I think my point still stands. You know, it doesn't really matter too much which data points we have, as long as there's something useful for determining, you know, some sort of service up versus service down, right? Obviously, it could be very rich, right? But the point is, if observability manages to give a very rich set of telemetry, then of course we can have better use cases, right? More deep dive use cases. But I think at first we're really trying to prove the mechanism, right? Showing any kind of control loop within FEO. And it can be elaborated later, of course, when there's more data.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from the essay perspective, do you think the story that I said is more of observability story than the essay story?
They're tied together, so it's very hard
exactly.
to differentiate, right? Because so obviously observability has uses that go beyond service assurance, right? There's a lot of other reasons why you would want to observe other than purely service assurance, right? So there are other use cases, but we haven't talked too much about those use cases, honestly, right now in FEO, right? So I think service assurance would be the first user, consumer of whatever comes from observability, right? Or at least the important consumer, right? That actually does something functionally useful with FEO.
All right.
Got a couple of hands still up. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, Wim is first.
Wim?
Yeah, Wim is first.
Yeah, so the thing here, my comment is, if you look to the text, right? I think it's very. I think if you would give it to, let's say, SIG2 for implementation, right? The challenge here is that to what level does it apply? And for example, I can apply this at network function level, or I can apply this at let's say topology level, right? So and even at other levels. So the question, I think, my experience from the use cases is we have to be very prescriptive of where we want to focus upon, because it has implication of what we want to achieve, right? So that's, I think, my comment on this one is that we should be very specific on the use case. So impact analysis is high level, but if you really want to get something going, we have to be probably more prescriptive of where we are focusing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So when I said that this slide maybe talks more about our lowest level being topology, that's not 100% true. I think that's exactly what we need to tease out as we develop and kind of understand what is at the network function level and what is the topology level. Because going back to Nefio's concept, for better or worse, this is how the Nefio project is really designed, around deploying network functions first, right? And our kind of philosophy of focusing on operators, a single operator deploying an entire network function, or a single Helm chart deploying an entire network function, that's kind of where Nefio stops, right? The vendor provides that, and that is opaque for us. That's a black box that comes externally, right? So these are the building blocks that we have in Nefio, right? We have network functions that have certain inputs and configurations for that entire network function. And obviously, with the operator approach, the idea is that the operator can do day 2 changes according to changes in declaration. So we can change, what we can do is change that CR for the network function, and the operator will do what it needs to do, right, to make that intent a reality. But we also have the higher level of a topology, right? But those are really the 2 things we can play with. And yeah, we're going to have to tease that out in a lot of precision. I agree with Wim here.
Just to add maybe, or to give a view, right? If you look to auto scaling, right, or I said there is already a system at the workload cluster available that Kubernetes provides that does, let's say, an action based on information that we are getting, right? So you could give it custom metrics, and he will basically scale in or scale out a network function, right? So that could be the focus initially. Right? We can go also to topology, but I'm just trying to highlight that depending on what we want to, let's say, prove or present, this has different components potentially involved. That's why I think we should first focus on the framework, right? How it looks like. And then maybe drill to the use case eventually. So this for me is a good, let's say, starting point to drill down, right? But I think if we want to, the final thing should be more prescriptive.
Good. The reason I just, Subhash, so if you allow, the reason why I was asking, I want to have a sort of a working mode here in place, in mind, where we say we're going to go through these steps to generate the deliverables which we've captured in the scope, so that we are not sort of iterating around, jumping in levels of details or saying we need to do this or that, but rather say, we can say we start with a framework and then sort of see how the use cases fit in, or we could do it the other way around, work on the use cases, then one by one, try to sort of optimize the framework. But I want to have a working mode where we are not jumping from conclusion A to conclusion B and not finalizing certain results. That would be, from my point of view, we would be not too effective if we continue in that manner.
I agree with the Bernard. Yeah, we should have something tangible thing that we should try to achieve.
So specifically, coming back to Wim's proposal, should we start working on the framework and say, let's make sure that we've got a rough understanding of what the framework should look like, and then see how we can optimize the framework based on the use case which we will be identifying, or do we do it the other way around? I just want to have a sort of a common understanding of how we approach this.
Actually, I think, Bernard, your initial 4 points, I would really turn them into, you put them as bullet points, but I would put them as 1, 2, 3, 4. I think they actually give us a nice plan for stages of how we can work, right? If we can go back to Bernard's slide, right? We start with 1, create use cases related to service assurance. 2, look at how they relate to Nephew basic concepts, right? Topology, network function, operator, CRs, kept functions, etc. Then drill down into the functional elements exactly, right? And that will be, I think, more prescriptive, what Wim calls, right? And finally tie it all together, right? So I really see this as a way for us to work, right, in terms of stages.
Okay. Wim, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I tend to agree, but sometimes it's good to iterate between the two, right? So but that's my personal thing, is always I try to sketch a framework and then use use cases, right? And then you see, okay, does it hold? Do we need to change and so on? So that's my personal view on how I typically operate, but everybody has a different opinion. But I like to sketch first like a framework that we believe could do this, and then you take use case and then you validate and validate and validate, and maybe you refine the framework. So so that's how I personally operate, but it's up to the group to decide. But
yeah, my comment on this is that so Wim, you're one of the people who's really an expert on the entire system of Nephew. So you would be able to already have 2 and 3 in your mind. I think for
I have a framework. I have a framework in mind, but that doesn't mean that that's the one that holds it. But okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I agree that we can iterate back and forth, but I think for the purpose of this work group, and to be maybe more welcoming to people who don't understand or know 100% of all the basic concepts of Nephew, I think I would prefer Bernard's approach here, or my elaboration of Bernard's approach, because
so for me, so Tal, just to comment, I'm not basically imposing the framework that we have. I would start with something very high level. So in other words, in my view, we always start from an intent, right? At least that's because you somehow have to figure out the impact of that intent, which is the service to a certain extent, right? So that's how I think. So for me, a service and an intent are somehow related, right? Yeah. And then you need something to, first of all, to express the, let's say, the service assurance metrics, you need to be able to collect it and you need to do something about it, right? So for me, that has nothing to do with what we have done, right? But that's in general the building blocks, right? And then you basically apply that to use cases. So that's for me the framework. So the framework is as simple as that.
Okay, yeah. So you're thinking more high level. Yeah, then I
Yeah,
agree
very
with you.
high level. Yeah, I'm thinking very high level, not basically thinking about anything we have done so far. So I'm really saying, okay, to do service assurance, this is what we need as a componentary thing without basically describing how we have done and what we have done in FU. So I like specialization and stuff like that. For me, doesn't matter at this stage, right? So it's actually, in order to do service assurance, how do we, what are the information models that we need to accomplish that? And then you apply it to use cases, right? And then you could say, okay, you go to work, you could go then to workload cluster. Okay, how does it look like? We go to maybe topology. How will this look like? And so on and so forth. And that's how I was thinking. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, then we're on the same page. Yeah, from a high level. Yeah, for me, the word framework starts to think about the actual Nephew frame internally.
No. For me, framework is really
okay,
high level. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of discussions end up being about semantics and linguistics.
Always.
But I do, maybe jumping ahead again, to the functional elements. So I mentioned observability as a big one, the topology controller. Another thing we didn't really discuss is a policy framework, right? We have another group.
So just to keep up on time, we need to go to the SIG automation meeting.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, didn't notice.
Which is in the same room apparently, because I just joined.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay, we'll stop here. Yeah.
Really, same room?
I think so.
Yeah, because it's the same SIG. So each SIG has its own
No,
standing.
actually, this one was SIG 3, I thought. The one that we were.
This is SIG 1.
Oh,
this is SIG
the
1.
SIG
right?
1, yeah, SIG 1. Yeah, that's what I thought.
You're right. The next one is the SIG 2 meeting. Right, it shouldn't be the same room. But anyway, we're still at time. And people need to join the other one, yeah.
I need to stop the recording, I think.
Yeah.
I just have it in my calendar wrong. Weird. Okay.
Oh,
I think
I don't have any control for stopping the recording. So could someone please do it?
I don't think it is recorded.